In the world of extreme survival, there is an unwritten rule, a code of honor that binds partners together. You never leave a man behind. You never let go. You fight until the bitter end together. But what happens when the laws of physics clash with the laws of morality? What happens when saving your friend means that you will both certainly die? Imagine you are hanging off the side of a mountain in the Peruvian Andes. It is pitch black. A blizzard is raging. It is 19,000 feet. You are holding a rope. The full weight of your injured partner is pulling you off the mountain. You can feel yourself slipping. The snow under your feet is crumbling. You have been holding him for an hour. Your hands are frozen claws. You are screaming his name into the wind, but there is no answer. You know that if you hold on for one more minute, you will be pulled off the cliff, and you will both fall to your deaths. But if you take the knife from your belt, if you sever that connection, you might live, but you will be murdering your best friend. You look at the knife, you look at the rope, and you make the choice. Slice. The tension releases instantly. The rope whips away into the darkness. Your friend falls into the abyss. You survive. You crawl back to camp, consumed by guilt, ready to tell the world that your friend is dead. But here is the twist that makes this story the most haunting survival tale of the 20th century. The friend didn't die. He fell 150 feet into a deep, icy crevasse. He was broken, dehydrated, and abandoned. But he wasn't dead. And while his partner was sleeping in a warm sleeping bag, mourning his loss, the dead man was waking up in the bowels of the glacier, staring at a circle of light miles above him, and deciding that he was going to crawl home. This is the story of Joe Simpson and Simon Yates. It is the story known as Touching the Void. It is a story that divides everyone who hears it. Half of you will say Simon was a hero for surviving. Half of you will say he was a villain for cutting the rope. But everyone will agree on one thing. What Joe Simpson did next is impossible. If you are fascinated by the darkest ethical dilemmas and the absolute peak of human endurance, please hit that subscribe *** button right now. You need to hear this story because it forces you to ask the question, would I have cut the rope? 1985, the Peruvian Andes. Joe Simpson and Simon Yates were young, fit, and incredibly ambitious climbers. They were 25 and 21 years old. They weren't interested in the easy routes. They wanted to make a name for themselves. They set their sights on the west face of Siula, Grande. This was a vertical wall of ice and rock that had never been climbed before. It was 21,000 feet of pure danger. They climbed alpine style. This means light and fast. No base camps, no Sherpas, no fixed ropes, just two men carrying everything they needed on their backs, moving up the mountain in a single push. It is the purest form of climbing, but it is also the deadliest. If something goes wrong, there is no backup. There is no rescue team. You are on your own. The ascent was brutal but successful. They reached the summit. They stood on top of the world. They hugged, they took photos. They felt invincible. But in climbing, the summit is only the halfway point. Most accidents happen on the way down. And Siula Grande was about to teach them a lesson in gravity. They began the descent along the North Ridge. The weather turned, a blizzard moved in, visibility dropped to zero. They were navigating a knife-edge ridge of cornices, overhanging shelves of snow that can break off under your weight. Joe Simpson was in the lead. He planted his ice axe. Suddenly, the ice gave way. He fell. It wasn't a long fall, maybe 20 feet, but he landed awkwardly on a steep ice slope. His right leg drove into his knee joint. Snap! The sound was sickening. It echoed inside his skull. The lower leg bone, tibia, smashed through the knee joint. The impact split the top of the tibia in half. Joe lay in the snow. The pain was blinding. Simon climbed down to him. "Are you okay?" Simon yelled over the wind. Joe looked at him. His face was gray. "I've broken my leg." In the mountains, at 19,000 feet, a broken leg is usually a death sentence. You cannot walk, you cannot climb, a rescue helicopter cannot reach you. Simon Yates looked at Joe. He knew the protocol. Self-preservation says you leave him, you save yourself. But Simon didn't leave. He looked at Joe and said, "We're going to get you down." What followed was an incredible feat of teamwork. Simon devised a plan. He would tie two 150-foot ropes together to make a 300-foot rope. He would lower Joe down the mountain 300 feet at a time. Then Simon would climb down to Joe. They would reset the anchor and do it again. It was slow, it was agonizing. Joe's broken leg was banging against the ice. Every bump sent shockwaves of pain through his body. But it was working. They descended 3,000 feet this way. They were getting closer to the glacier, closer to safety. They started to believe they might actually pull off the impossible. But the mountain had one final trap. Night fell, the storm intensified. Simon was lowering Joe blindly. He couldn't see where Joe was going. He paid out the rope, 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet. The rope went tight. Simon waited for the signal, a tug on the rope. That meant Joe was safe and had taken his weight off so Simon could climb down. He waited. No tug. He waited 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour. The rope remained tight as a steel bar. Simon was sitting in a bucket seat dug into the snow. The snow was soft like sugar. He was slipping. He realized with horror that he was being pulled off the mountain. Below him in the darkness, Joe Simpson was hanging in midair. Simon had unknowingly lowered him over a massive, overhanging cliff. Joe was dangling 20 feet away from the ice wall, spinning freely in the void. Below him was a crevasse, a bottomless crack in the glacier. Joe couldn't reach the wall to take his weight off the rope. He couldn't climb up the rope. His hands were frozen, and he had a broken leg. He screamed for Simon. "Simon, pull up." But the wind stole his voice. Simon couldn't hear him. So they were stuck. A deadlock. Simon holding the weight, Joe hanging in the abyss. Simon's hands were freezing. He was losing his grip. He felt the snow anchor giving way. He knew what was happening. If I hold on, we both fall. If I cut the rope, Joe dies, but I live. He held on for over an hour. He thought about his life. He thought about Joe. Finally, he made the decision that would define his life. He took out his penknife. He touched the blade to the taut rope. The fibers snapped instantly. The weight vanished. Simon was thrown backward into the snow. Joe Simpson plummeted into the dark. Joe fell 150 feet. He didn't hit the bottom of the cliff. He hit the entrance of a crevasse. He crashed through an ice bridge and fell deep into the belly of the glacier. He landed on a small ledge of ice, 80 feet down inside the crack. He was alive, but he was trapped in an ice tomb. It was silent, it was freezing. He looked up. He could see a tiny hole of light where he had fallen through. He screamed for Simon. Simon, I'm alive. Nothing. He realized Simon must think he's dead. Simon was gone. Joe assessed his situation. He had a shattered leg, no food, no water, no gas to melt snow. He was stuck on a ledge in a crevasse. Climbing up 80 feet of overhanging ice with a broken leg was impossible. He was going to die there. He would freeze to death slowly. But Joe Simpson had a stubborn streak. He looked down. The crevasse went deeper into the dark. But he noticed a slope. He made a terrifying calculation. I can't go up. My only choice is to go down. He decided to lower himself deeper into the abyss. Hopping there was another exit at the bottom. It was a suicide move. If the bottom was a dead end, he would be trapped forever. He set up an anchor. He lowered himself into the blackness. He touched the bottom. He looked around with his headlamp. He saw a ramp of snow leading upward. A beam of sunlight was hitting the floor further ahead. An exit. He crawled toward the light. He punched his way through the snow crust. He pulled himself out of the crevasse. He was back on the surface of the glacier. He was alive. But survival was still miles away. Joe was on the glacier. Base camp was 5 miles away over rough terrain, moraines, fields of boulders. He couldn't walk. He had to crawl. But crawling wasn't fast enough. So he developed a rhythm. He would stand on his good leg. He would throw his bad leg forward. He would hop. And then he would fall. Stand, hop, smash. Every time he landed, the broken bones in his knee ground together. The pain was so intense he would scream, vomit, and pass out. Then he would wake up, look at his watch, and do it again. He set goals. I will reach that rock in 20 minutes. If he reached it in 18 minutes, he was happy. If he took 22, he beat himself up. He treated himself like a drill sergeant. Get up, you lazy bastard, move. He crawled for 3 days. He had no water. He was eating snow, which made him more dehydrated and hypothermic. His lips cracked and bled. His mind started to break. He hallucinated. He heard voices. He heard a pop song from the 70s, Brown Girl in the Ring by Boney M., playing on a loop in his head. He hated that song. He thought, I can't die to Boney M., that's too tragic. Meanwhile, back at base camp, Simon Yates was a wreck. He had survived the night. He had descended the mountain. He looked for Joe's body at the base of the cliff, but saw nothing, because Joe was inside the crevasse. Simon was convinced Joe was dead. He reached camp. He stayed there for a few days to recover, grieving his friend. But he couldn't stay forever. He decided to leave the next morning. He packed his bags. He burned Joe's clothes. It was a ritual, a way of saying goodbye. The night before Simon was set to leave, Joe Simpson was nearing the camp. It was pitch black. Joe was delirious. He was crawling through the latrine area, the toilet field of the camp. He smelled the waste. To him, it was the sweetest smell in the world. It meant humans. He shouted, Simon. His voice was a croak, a whisper. Simon was sleeping in his tent. He heard his name. He thought he was dreaming, or maybe it was a ghost. He unzipped the tent. He shone his torch into the darkness. He saw a creature crawling on the ground. It looked like a monster. Its face was black with frostbite. Its beard was matted. It smelled of death. Joe, Simon whispered. The creature looked up. Help me. Simon ran to him. He dragged him into the tent. He fed him, he gave him water. The first thing Simon said was, "I cut the rope, Joe, I cut the rope." He expected Joe to be furious. He expected Joe to hate him. But Joe Simpson looked at him. He understood the mountains. He understood the code. "You did what you had to do," Joe said. "I would have done the same." There was no anger, only relief. Simon had saved Joe's life by cutting the rope. If he hadn't cut it, they both would have frozen on the wall. Or Simon would have fallen on top of Joe, and they both would have died in the crevasse. The cut gave Joe the chance to fall, to find the exit, and to crawl. It was a paradox. The act of betrayal was the act of salvation. It took Joe 6 operations to fix his leg. Doctors told him he would never climb again. 2 years later, he was climbing again. He wrote the book Touching the Void *. It became a bestseller. It became a movie. But the climbing community was harsh on Simon Yates. People called him the man who cut the rope. They shunned him. Joe Simpson spent years defending Simon. He stood up in lecture halls and shouted down critics. "You weren't there," he would say. "He saved my life." The story of Touching the Void is the ultimate gone wrong story because it forces us to confront our own morality. It is easy to judge Simon from the comfort of a warm room. But at 19,000 feet in a blizzard, with death staring you in the face, morality changes. It becomes binary, life or death. And Joe's crawl. It is the definitive example of breaking a massive problem into tiny steps. He didn't crawl 5 miles. He crawled 5 feet 5,000 times. It teaches us that no matter how deep the hole, no matter how broken the body, the mind can always take one more step. Joe Simpson and Simon Yates are still alive today. They drifted apart as friends. The trauma was too great to share, but the bond of that mountain remains. They proved that the human spirit is tougher than bone, tougher than ice, and tougher than the void. This story is the ultimate debate starter. I still get into arguments about it. So I have to ask you, would you have cut the rope? Be honest. Let me know your answer in the comments below. If you are blown away by Joe's crawl back to life, please hit that asterisk like asterisk button. And subscribe ***. I have a story coming next week about a man who was swallowed by a whale, literally, and lived to tell the tale. Stay safe, check your knots, and never give up.